A lot of your best qualities are up to you, completely within your control to choose. And today I'll be doing a little bit from my version of Meditations. This, of course, is not my version. This is a Casaubon. But I'm going to read a section here from Farquhar Harson's 1944 translation. So it's not super archaic, but it is weirdly intense, as you'll hear. And then I'll compare it to mine from Self-Calm, which again is my complete adaptation of merging together and updating wording from several public domain translations of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And here's a case too where you're going to hear that the Farquhar Harson translation is shorter. It's not super long. It's also going to be kind of, like I say, dense. And you'll hear mine's longer. I think in many cases, shorter text is not simpler. It's like when we're writing programming code, which I know many of you on my channel also write code like I do. The fewest lines of code isn't necessarily simplest, easiest to read, or even fastest for the computer to execute. In many cases, when we fill it in, it can be simpler, easier to follow, even if it's got a few extra words there. So this is Book 5, Chapter 5. Of course, in Self-Calm, I'd call that Book 5, Paragraph 5, but you get the idea. From the Farquhar Harson, your mental powers they cannot admire. Granted, but there is much else of which you cannot say. That is no gift of mine. Bring forth, then, what is wholly in your power. Freedom from guile, dignity, endurance of labor, distaste for pleasure, contentment with your portion, need of little, kindness, freedom, plain living, reserve in speech, magnanimity. See you not how much you are able to bring forth, where there is no excuse of want of gift or want of facility? And yet you are content to keep a lower place. Are you obliged to grumble, to be grasping, to flatter, to blame your poor body, to be obsequious, to vaunt yourself, to be tossed about in mind, because you have been fashioned without talent? No, by heaven, you had the power to be rid of all this long ago, and only, if at all, to be convicted of some slowness and tardiness of understanding. And even there you should exercise yourself, not disregarding your faults nor finding satisfaction in your dullness. Such a good contrast to how I rewrote it, expanded, elaborated, tried to introduce an easier to follow example, but you'll see here it's still the same points, it's still the basic general arguments that I think are much easier to follow in 2020 for a listener. My version 5.5 from Self-Calm, which again is free at self-calm.com if you want the ebook, or the audiobooks packed in with a bundle at self-command.com. Mental ability may hide within us, more difficult for people to notice than physical beauty or athletic fitness. But a major part of our mental ability seems formed for us by nature, and not fully by our own handiwork to take credit for. Though we can learn more subjects and skills, we may be no more able to turn ourselves into a genius than we could work at becoming taller. Likewise, it doesn't make sense for people with better mental potential by nature to speak badly of other people who were formed with less, any more than for tall people to disrespect short people. Taller people need to live in a world that has shorter people. Smarter people need to live in a world that has less smart people in it. Focus instead on developing and applying internal qualities that are fully up to you. Being sincere, trustworthy, honorable, determined, considerate, honest, independent, grateful for your situation, understanding, above simple desires, and not wanting excessive or showy things. Notice how these positive qualities are instantly and entirely available to anyone. It may take time for others to see these as a pattern from you, but you didn't have to train in them rigorously since childhood to be proficient. They can all be yours starting now if you choose them. Here, there is no excuse about differences in natural ability or being unable, and yet so many people choose, contrary to what would be best for them and everyone else, to live below their ability in these aspects. People grumble with excuses, fixate on their qualities they cannot change instead of the ones they can. Flatter to manipulate people to overlook their weaknesses, blame their body for what they will not do with their mind, and pathetically try to impress people who are not even worth impressing. You have the power to be nothing like those people in any of these ways, beginning from this moment, if you decide and commit to being the way you mean to be. If people are going to find fault with you, let it be with qualities you cannot fully choose. Even then, whether it's about slowness or a mistake made in comprehension, you can, and should, practice to improve as much as you can at those abilities. There are things you cannot change, things you have direct control over, and a broad gray area in the middle, where you can make the most of what you have, advance with effort, and progress over stages. Even a person born with great mental potential will achieve nothing of value with it if they do not develop, hone, and seek ways to apply it. Just like our path through life, we largely shape our mind by the path we take that overlaps where we choose to go and where we can go. But do not show pride or base your identity in settling for your current limitations as if you are no longer able to learn. And so clearly, mine a bit longer. And there's a few other kind of bits and pieces in there. Part of the way, again, I like this example of the contrast is that there's a few other bits that if you didn't read the rest of the text or hear the rest of the text from Meditations, you might not realize are throwbacks, echoes, tie-ins to other things said throughout. Right? Like I don't invent this overlap between what we can do and what we choose to do. That's another common theme throughout the work. Likewise, for these various bits and pieces, the examples drawn from are often borrowed or reflective of other things mentioned elsewhere in it. But the reason I bring this up is it's something I think you sometimes see on motivational posters, you sometimes see in business literature about these things of like, you know, whether or not you're late or not isn't a matter of ability. Whether or not you're positive, whether or not you're supportive, whether or not you're encouraging, whether or not you are open to feedback, that there's a lot of traits that aren't something that we have to be born with, aren't something we have to develop, aren't something we have to even practice or be trained in, so much as it's a decision we make of that's how I want to be. And to my knowledge, this might be one of the older examples from 1850 years ago of somebody articulating that there's these very important qualities. In many ways, I think some of our best qualities, some of our more important ones. You know, I mean, heck, if someone is living in these ways, being honest, being considerate, being determined, being honorable, being trustworthy, being sincere, being independent, grateful for the situation, understanding, above simple desires, and not wanting excessive or showy things, that's way more important to me than whether or not they were born with certain gifts or had certain advantages or even got a head start in developing certain skills. And that these are things which anybody, as is mentioned here, can choose to start doing now. It's not a matter of, well, I didn't do it up until now, so I can't. And there's also another echo elsewhere in this text. I think that's part of why I pulled that in here. Basically articulates that it's too late to have lived your entire life up to this point the way that you now see would be right. But that doesn't change a thing about the fact that from starting here forward, it's entirely in your control to do it the way you think it ought to be done. That we can't necessarily blame our childhood selves, and one of their common recurring themes throughout, right, is that we can only do the things, we should only give our attention to the things we can do something about. The past is never on that list of things we can do something about. We can learn from it to improve our present. We can learn from it to make predictions or estimations about our future, but we can't change it. And so instead, we can look at as well, I can't fix that. I can't change that. There's no shame, and that's how I lived then. Starting now, if I know better, if I decide to live differently, if I decide to be differently, in the ways I have full control over, or as even mentioned here, this thing of, even there you should exercise yourself, not disregarding your faults nor finding satisfaction in your dullness. Right? Or as I put it, do not show pride or base your identity in settling for your current limitations as if you're no longer able to learn. This is another bit where I think that quite often in the educational pathways we wind up in, we are forced or compelled or pushed to learn things in a way that I don't even think it's the student's fault. I think sometimes we internalize that as a chore, as a punishment, as a negative, as something we cannot wait to stop doing. Reminded of when I was a wrestler, and a lot of folks on the wrestling team would feel so forced and compelled and pushed as part of their obligations within that team, to the coach, to the school, however they conceived of their responsibilities, to make weight, to cut weight, to limit their food, or to be careful about their dietary choices, or to exercise extra in order to be under the weight. And then as soon as they no longer had to, in many cases very quickly fell wildly out of shape, which isn't a judgment on them. It's more of an observation that's effective when we have this external pressure on us to learn things. We might find ourselves resisting that when we no longer have to, we stop doing it. And we see the same effect of somebody used to maybe crank out a ton of book reports when we got stars to put on the board in school. And then more and more as life progressed and there was no star to put, and no one getting mad at you if you didn't do it, and no one checking your book reports, a lot of people don't read as much. Slow it down considerably, which, again, it's not a value statement. That's a choice people can make. What I'm getting at here, though, is that there's these areas where we might say, well, I never learned how to do that. And so what do I already know how to do? When we look at it as if we have this tool set, this kit of things that are available to us because of what we have or haven't learned, And this basically points out, like, no, you can still add tools to that tool set. You can still incrementally make progress in them. You can still learn things. You can still work from what you have, build up on what you're at. And that's addition to, right, these traits that we can fully choose. There's the ones in this gray area of, it's not that we can totally choose it like these others. It's not that we can't, like some other traits. I chose tallness in mine. I think intelligence was one originally focused on, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, as you heard in the Farquhar Harson translation. But there's this gray area in the middle of things that, no matter where we're at, we can improve in them. Came up the other day in a discussion in Home Team with a project lead who, perfectly capable as a programmer, been now leading at multiple projects, and is just kind of realizing from their experiences, maybe I have more proficiency in art, design, some other trait, some other quality. Is it that I'm just struggling in programming? And, there's several things possible, right? One thing may well be that not everyone has particularly the same advantages, inclinations, affinities for every single discipline. That's reality. That's human existence. That's a fine part of why teamwork exists, why we collaborate with others. That said, from an enrichment angle, from a matter of personal development, it can both be true that I will never sing on a choir, I will never play an instrument in a professional band. I accept that as where I'm at. And if nothing else, my level of priority on I am unwilling to make the trade-offs it would take to throw myself into that's not my priority. That said, that does not mean that I should therefore dismiss the possibility of learning more about how to create music. Maybe there's different ways to create music. Maybe there's different ways to develop and learn those skill sets, to deepen my appreciation of things, to deepen my empathy for other people who have gone further down that path. And that's something, too, that came up to echo back to that discussion I had the other day with Jen McGonigal in a research group. One of the things that we still see strongly defended in the hobbyist and recreational and many times student or beginner space for game developers in a way that the more progressed they get towards commercialization, which includes the indie branch as well, but obviously triply so in the AAA standpoint, is this appreciation of their humanness in they don't want to be part of an assembly line. They don't want to only do one thing, even if they're the best in the world at it. They want to do different stuff. They want to be able to put sounds in it and make levels and write code and a whole ownership over, I created this character. It was my character idea. I implemented it. I drew the art for it. I did the sounds for it. These are things that happen in Home Team. These are things that can happen at the non-professional level, whether it's freeware or other types of forms that it takes. That increasingly, as someone gets more advanced, it's harder to do. But it's in this gray area of, I want to work on that. And I think that the reason why we see that often pushed back in adult life and why we lose that gray area of, I don't need to accept my limitations, I can still work on them, is partly because we tend to replace in our lives the place that school filled for us with the place that work fills for us. We used to get assignments from school, now we get assignments from work. We used to have a teacher, now we have a boss. But in there, part of what's lost is that obviously in the case of school, you're often given things to do for your benefit. You're being given assignments because you are going to grow and become better off by having done it. That's kind of the whole point. Whether or not you see it that way, that's kind of what's going on there. In the work situation, and this is not a one-size-fits-all, there's companies that are better about this. Generally speaking, from a practical standpoint, work is giving you assignments because it makes them better. It makes the company better, the product better, the stock better, the boss's situation better, their earnings better, maybe the customer better. But if it makes you better as the employee, it's kind of tangential to that. If you're lucky, it lines up. There's some Venn diagram there. But it's incidental. It's not the main point like it is in school. And so as part of this, necessarily, this is also where, in a professional environment, and precisely why they can't have that same appreciation of humanity in terms of, I exist, it matters that I'm me, and let me exercise my ideas, even if I'm less good at these particular things. In those cases where the end result is we have to prioritize what's best for the customer and what's best for the company, they will basically say, well, you don't have as much experience at music as Paul over here. Paul's going to do our music. You keep doing what you do. You don't have as much experience at animation system codings as Jess does over here, so Jess is going to take care of that. You keep doing what you do. And again, if we have this mentality that the place that school filled in our lives is now the place that work fills in our lives, we find ourselves continually reinforced to not bother at the things that we aren't as advanced in. We didn't have the head start in that gray area. We let stay gray. We begin to further identify in, well, I'm not a musician. Well, I'm not an animator. Well, I'm not a writer, or whatever it is. And that's part of why I find, whether or not it's through Home Team, whether or not it's through game development at all, the importance of having hobby recreational outlet stuff on the side for growth. And it can sound a little bit like, and certainly it is to some extent, a matter of privilege of having the flexibility of being able to fit in a few hours a week here and there to do things that are important to us. I think that when we can have at least make the wiggle room to at least, like I say, a few hours a week, put that stuff in, which is all the level of time people on Home Team are putting in most cases. In many ways, that can refuel us. That can take our energy level back up. That can refill us. That can get us feeling more grounded, less disconnected from what we're doing, having a better sense of big picture, having a better sense of our relationship to other people who, like I say, might be better in their other specializations, and that for an ultimately better product may be part of the framework we have to fit ourselves into. But it's nice to be able to go home and occasionally grow your areas that you can grow, to not take too much pride in, with their words, finding satisfaction in your dullness, disregarding your faults. That you can find out, I'm not good at that, and your answer to that can be, I can get better at it. But most importantly, and to go back to our opening point, and the whole reason for today's video, is that for most of these good traits, which I'll go over one more time because I think that there's obviously a sort of a avalanche of them, being sincere, trustworthy, honorable, determined, considerate, honest, independent, grateful for your situation, understanding above simple desires, and not wanting excessive or showy things, those are fully up to you. No one can change how you feel about those things. No one can do them for you. No one can take them away from you. Those are up to you. And that's it for the day. If you'd like to check out the whole book, it's free at self-calm.com. If you'd like the audiobook, it's bundled at self-command.com. Thanks for being here. Catch you another day.